everywhere. Also a good friend of the pod, so I do appreciate every time he can stop by. Corey, I got to tell you, the audio audience can't appreciate this, but my God, that mustache in all its glory, that is something. I caught it on Friday watching some of the overtime show on DAZN that you did. It just being this sort of virtually close to it, it doesn't do it justice. That is a real mustache. Like, you have got a real mustache right now. Would you care to explain to your legions of fans why you are going the mustache route?
Yeah, well, I debuted it the night before on DAZN on the Salida Promotions big time boxing broadcast. I don't know that I have like a thorough process as to why I'm going this way. I think it boils down to my wife said that I looked attractive, and then I said, okay, let me just roll with this. And maybe, to like be a little edgy a little bit, but now I have to enter a whole new world of like beard wax and stuff like this. So, I mean, we'll see how long it lasts, but I gotta say, I'm liking how it's looking so far, Chris.
When you have the hat on and the glasses with the mustache, you kind of look like someone that's entering witness protection. Like, it's...
Yes.
You've kind of got that anonymous look to you that you could pass as anybody at any time. So if that's what you're going for, well done.
I mean, listen, if you want to see more of this, I mean, get yourself a good VPN and get yourself a subscription to these Bulgarian channels also.
There have been a couple of times, not to go way off track here, but like when I've shaved, and I could grow a mustache probably pretty quickly. I've shaved and I've left the mustache on, after shave just to see what it looks like. And I'm like, nah, man, I can't do that. That does not work for me. It does not work for you, Corey. You can pull it off. Me, not so much. So well done on that part. We'll have some clips on YouTube, by the way, for people that want to see this Corey mustache up close and personal. So great weekend in boxing, Corey, like a 4-day weekend of great fights. And I want to focus on the stuff that we saw on Saturday night, where we had a new unified 154-pound champion crowned in Tszyu-Fundora, also a new cruiserweight champion crowned in Zurdo Ramirez. But let's start with Tszyu-Fundora against Tszyu, which was not without controversy. At the end of the second round, Tszyu suffered a pretty nasty cut on the top of his head as a result of an accidental clash of top of head, front of forearm or elbow area on Tszyu-Fundora at the end of the second round. Tszyu, to his credit, fought through it, but it clearly affected him for the last 10 rounds of this fight. He was constantly wearing kind of that crimson mask, like it was just flowing throughout the course of that fight. So, big picture, what did you think of the fight, Fundora's performance, and how much did that cut change things for Tszyu?
I think the cut changed absolutely everything. I mean, at a certain point, and not at a certain point, pretty quickly once that gash had opened up, Tszyu was spending a good chunk of his time just pawing at his eyes and trying to figure out a way to see where he was. It obviously impacted him. And I'm going to be honest here, and this is with all due respect to Tszyu-Fundora, I went into this fight thinking that Tszyu was going to stop Fundora. And even in the early rounds, especially before that cut, but even immediately afterwards, I still thought that was going to be the case. I didn't think that Fundora was going to be able to take types of shots that he was taking for the entirety of the fight. Now, he absorbed a lot of punishment, and that despite Tszyu fighting, obviously, with a big handicap, but it changed the fight dramatically. And I know there are going to be a lot of discussions about, did the Tszyu corner make the right call? Well, obviously, at the end of the day, it's easy to say no, but I understand the thought process in that case. Number one, your fighter is landing all the shots that he wants to early on. So you see that cut, your fighter tells you, yeah, I want to continue, I'm okay. You think that this fight is going to get over with pretty soon. You're going to be okay, that you'll be bailed out. But also number two, I mean, that hideous gash happens in the second round. And I think there's a lot of external pressure in that situation. It's the first PBC show on Amazon Prime. It's this relaunch of the company, basically. You probably in the back of your mind are already hearing the groans of disappointment if that show ends. because of a foul after the second round. All of these things are in the back of your mind. And then again, at the end of the day, you have a dog of a fighter in Tim Tszyu telling you, no, I'm fine, let me go. And it backfired, obviously. And if they were to do it again, you probably pull him out either immediately or you make the call at like round 5 or 6 when you think you're ahead on the scorecard. You tell the referee, no, he can't see, and then hopefully you get the decision. But what we did get from a big picture standpoint, visually, we got one of the most gruesome looking, bloodiest world title fights that we've seen in a long time. So the controversy aside, for PBC, for this relaunch, you probably can't ask for more than what you got.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the corner of Tim Tszyu because I touched on this briefly in the open. And look, Tim Tszyu won the first 2 rounds clean. And if you just had those first 2 rounds to go off, you would have bought into the idea that Tszyu could have knocked Fundora out because he was landing that right hand pretty consistently. Fundora couldn't really do much with it. He was jabbing better than he has in the past, but there were several times Tim Tszyu found an opening for that right hand, and we know Fundora's been knocked out before with a similar type of shot. So sending him out for the 3rd round, I was okay with. But Tszyu lost that 3rd round. And he lost the 3rd round in large part because he spent most of it dealing with the blood flowing down from his face. It was getting into his eye. He was pawing at it. He just couldn't be the same fighter in that 3rd round. Having seen that, the corner at the end of the 3rd round should have said to the doctor, he can't see, that's enough. Because at the end of the 2nd round, or the start of the 3rd round, when the referee called time and sent Tszyu over to the doctor, you saw right away that doctor was like, no. Like the doctor, in that moment, wanted to stop the fight. I think he and the referee agreed, let's let it go one more round, let's see what they can do with it. And eventually they let the thing play out. But the doctor was ready and willing to stop the fight in a moment's notice. If the Tszyu corner at the end of the 3rd round had said, you know what, this is too bad, we can't stop the blood, no question, the doctor would have stopped the fight, the referee would have stopped the fight, it would have gone not to the scorecards, it would have been a no contest inside 4 rounds. And look, that's a disappointing outcome for Tim Tszyu, but it's certainly better than a loss, right? Like, and I know you can't foresee what played out, but they should have seen that this cut was bad, and this cut was going to get worse. And the fact they didn't see that, the fact they didn't pull Tim Tszyu out, that was a bad call, in my opinion. They should have pulled Tszyu out of that fight. And it was another example, Corey, of Tim Tszyu and his team in this case thinking more with their balls, frankly, than with their brains, right? Like Tim Tszyu taking this fight, we all praised him for it, even though I thought, maybe a little bit crazy. You're training for a 5'6" right-hander who you're going to chase around. You get a 6'6" left-hander who is going to be following you. So, like, that in of itself was a little crazy, but we all called Tim Tszyu a throwback fighter. We praised him for it. Great. But in that moment, his corner should have recognized that he was losing, or this fight was going to go bad because that cut was uncontrollable. And you mentioned, like, 5th or 6th rounds, they could have done the same thing. But the 5th or 6th rounds, you don't know what the scorecards look like at that point. You know, you stop the fight due to an accidental cut, you don't know. 2 judges could have it going for Fundora at that point. They simply couldn't take the risk once it went past that 4th round. I look at the end of the 3rd, and I blame Tim Tszyu's corner for that. They should have stopped the fight and lived to fight another day. Keep your title, take the no contest. Maybe you do a rematch with Fundora, maybe you don't, but that, to me, was a big mistake by Tszyu's corner.
Yeah, and I think that we can safely say that now. I also appreciate that probably is one of the most difficult positions a corner can be in because of all the things that I was talking about before, that kind of background noise and all those considerations. Hey, are people going to be mad at you because you stopped it when it did? Now, obviously, we know, we're watching, and they don't know that the viewers, broadly speaking, when they're watching that, they're seeing that and thinking, oh my God, that's a hideous cut. If this fight stops now, that's okay. I understand. But in the moment, they're seeing a couple things. Number one, their fighter dominated the first 2 rounds. Number 2, their fighter is saying that he can continue. But then in the back of their mind, yeah, they're thinking, oh, am I going to be labeled or is my fighter going to be labeled a quitter because he backed out only after he started losing a round at that point? Like there's all of these pressures that are rooted in hubris that come along with the sport of boxing and with making decisions for your fighter. And that's,
yeah, but Corey, he's got like the corner's got to make that call. The corner's
I know.
Tim Tszyu would not have been labeled a quitter if the corner pulled it out. Like
I
nobody,
know that.
Yeah, and nobody with like eyeballs would have said that was a bad call. I mean, that was like not quite Badu Jack territory, but when they went to that kind of wide shot every time the rounds began, you could clearly see the cut on the top of his head. That was a grotesque cut. So, yeah, I mean, I that's where the corner's got to be the one to take the heat, in my opinion. Like, they have got to be the ones to say, look, I did it. I didn't think my guy could do it. My guy is tough. My guy wanted to go on, but I decided this fight was no longer going to continue.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where, again, the difficulties of being a boxing corner is that in an ideal situation, you have to be completely emotionally removed from that situation. Because, yeah, if you're looking at that situation purely logically, purely intellectually, you could see that's a fight that shouldn't continue, probably just medically. But number two, you're putting your fighter in a position to potentially lose that fight. I think you already have to be thinking as the PR person in that moment and say, hey, my response to any questions about this is going to be exactly what you said, Chris. Hey, I had to make the decision to look out for my fighter. It wasn't safe for him to continue. And then, like, any follow-up questions, there are no follow-up questions at that point. That's just it. But I do appreciate how difficult it is to make that decision in the moment, but retroactively, we could safely say it was the wrong one.
So it sounds like Sebastian Fundora, as the unified champion, now has three options. He can fight Terrence Crawford, who is the ordered mandatory for the WBO version of that title. That fight was ordered officially this week by the WBO. He could do a rematch with Tszyu, which Samson Lukowicz, the promoter of Sebastian Fundora, said they would do. If Tszyu wants an immediate rematch, Lukowicz said they would do it because promises were made, I guess. Like, not everything is in writing, but apparently Fundora agreed to or promised to give Tszyu a rematch if he won. So Samson's out there saying if that's what Tszyu wants, that's what Tszyu gets. The other option apparently is Errol Spence, who is now back. Errol Spence back on the scene. Haven't heard from him since that loss to Terrence Crawford, not in any meaningful way. He climbs into the ring afterwards and says he wants to fight Tszyu. Now, that fight certainly is possible. They could fight for the WBC version of Tszyu's belt, now Fundora's belt. I got to stop calling it Tszyu's belt. Fundora's belt, now that he is the champion, he could drop the WBO version of that title. What do you think is the right play here, the right call for Sebastian Fundora?
I think the right call is just taking the Crawford. Like, if you have your choice and all three options are on the table for you, I think you take the Terrence Crawford fight. And I think because, could you have imagined 6 months ago a world in which Fundora was facing Terrence Crawford? Like, if you get your chance to face arguably the best fighter on the planet, the best pound-for-pound fighter out there that comes along with the purse that it would come along with, I think you take that option. But I'm curious as to how even these choices actually are for Sebastian Fundora, because you and I know the reality that if someone is getting in the ring and making challenges after a broadcast, not to peel back the curtain too much, but there's usually some discussion about that beforehand. Those things are pre-planned. And if that's the case, I wonder how much pressure is being put on Fundora to potentially take that Spence fight instead. And if maybe the idea is to engineer a Spence Crawford rematch with that 154-pound unified title on the line. So those are questions that I have in the back of my mind. But if all things were being equal, I take the Crawford fight, not because I think it's the most winnable fight of the two, but because it's an attempt at the top of the mountain that was unthinkable for a fighter like Sebastian Fundora. Forget about 6 months ago, 1 month ago. I think that when it falls in your lap, you have to take a chance like that if you're given that option as an athlete, as a fighter.
Yeah, I'd take the Crawford fight too. I can appreciate the desire to do right by Tszyu, from Sampson and from Fundora. But if a Crawford fight is on the table, that is a legacy fight. That is a huge money fight. There's those kind of fights don't come around all that often. And for Sebastian Fundora, who has been waiting for a title shot for years, I mean, how many years did he have that interim belt around his waist? I mean, he has been right there, at the virtual mountaintop, waiting for this opportunity for a long time. Now that it's there, I think you got to find a way to take it. I'd like to see a scenario where Fundora fights Crawford, and then Tszyu fights Sergey Boychuk, who for some reason is now the interim champion for the WBC at 154 pounds. I would love to see that fight take place, and then the winner of those two fights can clash. So, if Tszyu beats Boychuk, who looked really good against Mendoza, just mowed down Brian Mendoza, didn't really see that coming. If Tszyu beats Boychuk, then you've got a scenario where he's either going to get a shot at Terence Crawford, which he's wanted all along anyway, or a rematch with Sebastian Fundora, which there's interest in after that fight. To me, that is the best path. The Errol Spence stuff, I just want to see Errol Spence back first. Come back, get a win. We don't even know what to expect from Errol Spence anymore. He was just so soundly beaten in that fight against Crawford. Take a lower level fight at 154. Show everybody that, you're back, and then get back in the mix there. If you still want to fight, you've still got some miles left. You can do a fight like that. And I would like to see Errol Spence kind of removed from it for now until he shows that he's back.
Yeah, and I think if you're Team Tszyu, I understand wanting, as a competitor, wanting the immediate rematch. But I also, if I'm him, I wouldn't go too far out of my way to insist upon that immediate rematch either, because I think that any of these scenarios are decent for Tim Tszyu anyway. And I also think that the boxing marketplace, from what I've seen, really isn't treating Tszyu like a loser in this scenario. I think that most people who watch that fight kind of see him as an unfortunate victim of circumstance and of his own bravery, and that whatever Tszyu gets next, whether, it's a Boychuk fight, whether he fights Errol Spence, whatever happens, that rematch against Fundora, there's going to be interest in it no matter what. Even if Fundora went and lost to Terence Crawford or lost his next fight, whatever, I think that he can get that revenge for himself afterwards. So if that fight materializes right away, great, but I don't think it's the end of the world for Tszyu if they can't enact that immediately.
All right, the co-main event of this show was Isaac Cruz against Rolly Romero. Rolly came into the fight as the WBA 140-pound title holder, but I think a lot of people expected Isaac Cruz to, walk through him, and that's exactly what Isaac Cruz did. Just, kept relentless pressure up, almost had him knocked out in the first round. I mean, the fact that Rolly didn't go down in that first round was a credit to him, but eventually got him out of there early in the 8th round. Rolly sounded like he was concussed badly after the fight in that post-fight interview. My question for you, Corey, is about Cruz. Did we see a star turn right here for Isaac Cruz, who got a lot of credit for how he fought against Gervonta Davis a couple of years ago? Now he moves up to 140 pounds. He wins a world title in his first fight in that weight class. He had a lot of fans in that building. When I was watching that broadcast back, I would argue that Isaac Cruz should have been the headliner there. Isaac Cruz brought the majority of the fans. There was definitely a bit of a letdown when the main event started with Tszyu and Fundora. Those fans were there to watch Isaac Cruz, a lot of them. Did we see a star-turning performance from Isaac Cruz?
Yeah, or maybe we just didn't know how big of a star he was, because those fans, like you said, that they were there for him. But I think that I had the same reaction when I was watching his ring entrance. I texted my friend Morgan Campbell, and I was like, is it just me, or is the crowd absolutely deafening for Isaac Cruz right now? He got a reaction that you seldom hear, I mean, for any fighter, but let alone a fighter that isn't in the main event that night. And it's interesting. I think that Cruz is in a good position now in that weight class, in that weight neighborhood, because he seems to represent kind of the antithesis of the other characters around him, like the Rollies and the Garcias and the Haneys, these guys that have, big personalities, big social media presences. They fight with a little more flair. Here's Tszyu-Cruz, who fights in one direction, has no frills whatsoever, and fights with sheer aggression. And watching that fight, I can't remember an example of a fighter fighting with more disrespect or disdain for his opponent than Tszyu-Cruz did in that fight. He was fighting like someone who legitimately hated his opponent and who legitimately believed that his opponent had absolutely nothing that could bother him, and he turned out to be right. And that created a very interesting atmosphere too. I think that was a part of it. I think that, number one, people seem to really love Tszyu-Cruz. People also really hate Rolly Romero. So it was the perfect combination of two fighters in there that complement one another. It's pro wrestling, right? I mean, the good heel helps the good baby face, and that's exactly what we saw there. And I think that only elevates Cruz and now puts him in a power position with that title, and with another win under his belt.
Yeah, and I don't want to pigpile Rolly Romero, but he is a great character who is a bad fighter. Like he just is. Like he's got a good record, but that record has been built very controversially. Right? Like he should have lost that fight to Jackson Marinez, before he fought Gervonta Davis. He was okay against Gervonta. I don't think he was rounds against him, but then he ultimately got knocked out badly. In his next fight, he got a gift of a decision by Tony Weeks that awarded him a world title he didn't really earn. Anyone that thought Rolly was going to win this fight doesn't watch enough Tszyu-Cruz and certainly doesn't watch enough Rolly Romero. Tszyu-Cruz is not a brutal one-punch knockout guy, but he is a relentless pressure fighter that can crack with both hands. So this fight played out probably exactly like most people that understand it expected to play out. They expected him to walk Rolly down and eventually get to him. And that's exactly what happened. I'd look, Tszyu-Cruz now just opened up a big door for himself, right? Because now he's got a belt at 140, a legitimate belt there. Now we'll see what the WBA orders next. If they are acting with integrity, they will order Ishmael Barroso to face Tszyu-Cruz, because Ishmael Barroso has earned it, right? He got screwed against Romero. He responded by wiping out O'Hara Davies in one round in what was supposed to be a title eliminator. By all rights, that shot at that belt belongs to Ishmael Barroso. But having a title at 140, having a fan base behind you, and having a history with Gervonta Davis makes Tszyu-Cruz a perfect second half of the year opponent for Gervonta, because that rematch got a lot more interesting based on what Tszyu-Cruz did in that fight with Romero and the crowd that came to support him. Like, I didn't have a huge amount of interest, Corey, in the rematch over the last couple of years while Cruz was campaigning for it. I thought he fought well, and I think I even scored it a draw, his fight with Gervonta. But it wasn't some great fight that I desperately needed to see one more time. Now that Cruz has a belt at 140, and now that he's bringing his own fan base to the table, that's a fight that does a massive gate in Las Vegas. It is a legitimate world title fight. So my hope is that Cruz gives Barroso an opportunity to fight sometime this summer, and then end of the year, maybe December, you get a Gervonta Cruz matchup that would be a pretty compelling fight both at the box office and when it comes to pay-per-view.
Yeah, and that fight is extremely compelling now, but I think that looking back and again, looking at the crowd that turned out for Tszyu-Cruz in this fight, I mean, people were making noise for that rematch all along. And I think I was in the same boat as you, Chris. It wasn't top of mind for me. I wasn't clamoring for that rematch. I know that Tszyu-Cruz fought well. I also understood the realities of Gervonta fighting with one hand in that fight as well. But I think, Cruz obviously has a style and a personality that connects with the fan base. People love this guy. And in particular, he has the type of style that just, it's simplistic enough that it connects with everyone. Everyone loves this pressure fighter because they think that pressure will be the antidote for everything. All throughout Floyd Mayweather's career, what did we hear? Well, you got to pressure him. No one ever pressures this guy. No one ever walks him down. you know when Esau Cruz is in the fight, it's precisely what he's going to do. So in that respect, he gives the fans exactly what they're asking for. They have a game plan in mind, and he's going to go out there and try it, and it either works or it doesn't. Like he's the perfect fan favorite fighter. And you're right. After there was already clearly a lot of people that wanted to see that rematch. Now I think there's a really damn good reason to see it too.
All right. Speaking of fan-friendly fighters, Gilberto Ramirez is your new WBA cruiserweight champion. This after Zurdo put together a pretty comprehensive beating of longtime world title holder Arsen Goulamirian. I was ringside, Corey, in LA for that fight, and I just remember thinking before the opening bell, like, this might be where the Zurdo train stops, right? Like, for so many years, we watched Zurdo Ramirez fights, and we saw a guy just bully his opponents. He was always so much bigger than most of his opponents at 168, at 175. But this was a guy he was facing that was a career-long cruiserweight that had 19 knockouts in his 27 wins. That was coming in, even though it was off on a long layoff, with confidence. I'll admit, I believed Goulamirian was going to stop him. That was my prediction going into that fight. But Zurdo Ramirez, for the second fight in a row, showed me an evolution to his game. This is not the same pressure fighter, wing shots, win just by sheer volume. He had a game plan. He showed good footwork. He showed better than expected defense. You know, I thought the Joe Smith fight was the best fight of Zurdo Ramirez's career. No longer. This win over Goulamirian was the best performance I've seen from Zurdo Ramirez. And a real credit to him being able to change his style, become a different fighter at this stage of his career. What did you think of Zurdo's win?
Yeah, I thought it was a brilliant boxing performance. And you're right, Chris. He's adapted to the realities of the new weight class, that he can't fight exactly the same way that he did before because he's not going to be colossally bigger than his opponents the way that he's been for the vast majority of his career. And the other thing that I kept thinking too is this is kind of an illustration of the realities of how much some of these 175 pounders, 168 pounders are actually cutting or taking off their natural frame, because learning that Zurdo walks around 220. I mean, I know that he's been putting on mass, he's putting on body weight, he's been putting on muscle mass over the last little while, but the fact that that guy was making 168 not that long ago shows you just what he was doing to his body. Just to, like, he must have been turning down every meal, sleeping in saunas, whatever. Like, I don't know how he was getting down there at that point, but it must have been pretty damn uncomfortable. So, but Zurdo clearly fits in. Like, he doesn't look out of place at cruiserweight. I thought his body looked pretty solid up there. He seems very comfortable. He seems energetic. And it's fun having a fighter who has a legitimate fan base that's based in the United States in the cruiserweight division like this. And historically, the spikes in popularity in the cruiserweight division have come when guys have either come down or up that have been popular in other weight divisions. I mean, really, like, the genesis of this division entirely is because, Evander Holyfield comes up to cruiserweight, Dwight Muhammad Qawi comes up as well, Leon Spinks for like the one of the inaugural title fights comes down to cruiserweight. You get these recognizable names and people say, yeah, cruiserweight's really fun. These 200 pounders, that they're the size of the old timey heavyweights. They're athletic and with power. These fights are great. So I'm always excited when there is another lens or a clearer lens on this division, because I mean, Zurdo against anyone is not going to be a boring fight. I'll put it that way.
Yeah. I want to give Julian Chua a lot of credit too for helping to, change Zurdo into the fighter that we're seeing today. He has done a great job at making Zurdo Ramirez a boxer. And I know that was the plan when he first started working with him. There was a lot of people skeptical of it. I'm sure I was among them. But the footwork that Zurdo showed against Joe Smith, the pivoting, the movement he had against Goulamirian. There were things that I was impressed with that just based on Zurdo's natural gifts. Like, he took clean shots and he was able to hang with them. So I'm impressed, continue to be impressed by his chin, but he won that fight as much with tactics as anything else. Like, I commented on this during the fight, but Goulamirian was like searching for a target the entire fight. He was looking for an opportunity to let his hands go. And Zurdo, all fight long, just shrunk up that target. Like he had his chin tucked, his head down, his hands up. They were covering his lower midsection as well. Like that was strategy. That was a game plan for Zurdo Ramirez coming into that fight. And that has enabled him to become the fighter that we're seeing today. I'm really impressed. Like when he lost to Dimitri Bivol, Corey, I thought that was it. Like, he maybe goes up to cruiserweight, but he's as big as he is. Like, he's not going to be that big at cruiserweight. I know people were talking about him as heavyweight. I was skeptical of that. But the changes he's made over the last year and a half and the improvements he's made, working with Julian Chua even more, they've turned him into a guy that's an elite cruiserweight at this moment. Like, he is up there among the top cruiserweights in the world. And to your point, cruiserweight is still not the sexiest of divisions, but it's becoming more interesting. I said on the air, like, it usually is like a way station for fighters on their way up to heavyweight or bridgerweight, I guess. But he's helping to he's going to make this division interesting, because at the top of it, you've got Jai Apataya, who is becoming a massive star, over in Europe and Australia and in the Middle East, of course, where he's been fighting of late. You've got other guys that are there. I saw Chris Billum-Smith tweeted at me, when I didn't put his name in a graphic in terms of next opponents. He wants a piece of Zurdo. He's a developing name. If Zurdo wants to try to go to that dumb bridgerweight division, he could fight, Lawrence Okoli might have a belt in that weight class at some point. That could be an interesting fight, maybe over in the UK. All of a sudden, this sort of, less talked about weight class is pretty interesting. Like, I'd love to see Zurdo against Jai Apataya. Like, I think that's a great fight. It's a tremendous clash of styles. The athleticism and the one-punch power of Jai versus just the sheer pressure and volume and skill set of Zurdo Ramirez. I think that is a big-time main event, either in the U.S. or over in the U.K.
Yeah, and I see no reason why that can't materialize really in the near future. I think one thing that has plagued cruiserweight over the years, and it's the same thing that you see in like the very lowest of weight classes as well. These weight classes that are a little more obscure to the United States audience, is that and this is a broad generalization, but generally just the finances don't make sense often to make big fights. And obviously, and these are also very international divisions as well. So you'll have a cruiserweight champion in Australia, and then you have a Mexican contender and whatnot. And because if the audience base isn't there, where does the money come from? And oftentimes that has robbed us of some fights that maybe we would have wanted in these types of weight classes. But these guys now do have fan bases, and they have broadcasters as well. So, I mean, like, the best era that we've seen in cruiserweight really in the last little while is because a tournament format wiped these things out and said, well, the money is taken care of, the scheduling's taken care of, fight one another. And the cruiserweight tournaments that we got were awesome. We all love those. But now I think we have awesome fights and guys with fan bases that also connect here in the United States, which still makes a difference when it comes to money, at least. I see no reason why we can't get a Zurdo and Opataya, and it would, in wherever they put it, I think it draws really well too.
Yeah, Chris Billum-Smith made it clear that he's willing to come over to the U.S. to fight Zurdo. So you do that fight in Southern California, Los Angeles, Anaheim. You're going to draw a pretty decent crowd, and that's a pretty decent main event on DAZN. Before I let you go, I know you love a good title eliminator, and we've got a good title eliminator this weekend. Nobody loves a title eliminator more than Corey Urban. You've got a 140-pound clash headlined by Richardson Hitchins going up against Gustavo Lemos. Hitchins, of course, kind of a rising star, pretty much the mandatory at this point for Subriel Matias' 140-pound title. And you got Lemos, who's undefeated, fought almost exclusively, I think, in Argentina. But he's heavy-handed. He comes forward, and he's a pressure type of fighter. I'm of the opinion, Corey, that this is the kind of fight that Richardson Hitchins needs to do better than just win. Like, his last fight against Jose Zepeda was a clear, dominant decision win. But it was disappointing. It wasn't entertaining. It wasn't good TV. And I'm not expecting every fight to be Gotti Ward, but I thought there were moments in that fight against Zepeda that Hitchins missed opportunities to close the show. I thought he had a defeated guy in front of him from really the 9th round on. You know, when Zepeda knew he was way down the scorecards, he knew he couldn't catch up to Hitchins. And I thought that Hitchins should have done more to try to finish the fight by knockout. That's just not in his DNA, though. Like, he is a mover. He's an incredibly talented guy. He's always in great shape. I need to see more from Richardson Hitchins in this fight. If he winds up beating Lemos in the same way that he beat Zepeda, yes, it will get him at one step closer to that fight against Subriel Matias. But it's not going to win him over any more fans. And it's not going to create kind of a mandate to have that fight as a main event on DAZN or anywhere. So, to me, this is an important fight for Richardson Hitchins, not just to win, but I think he has to look good.
Yeah, I think that doing those things would certainly be helpful. But I think the reality is that not every fighter is going to be great TV. And I think that Hitchins just might fall into that category. I think, you and I called his last fight and there was chaos in his corner. There were some things going on. And I recall you talking to him after the fight, and he kind of admitted to not stepping on the pedal quite as much because, that isn't in his DNA.
Just to clarify, he had, for some reason, he had Shakur Stevenson calling him. He's speaking on the phone.
Mid-fight.
Like mid-fight. And his friend is relaying Shakur's instructions during the fight, which was one of the wildest things that I've ever seen. Corey, I don't need to see, like I said, I don't need to see a street fight out there. In fact, you go back to the fight Hitchins had 2 fights earlier, which was against John Bauza at MSG. That fight went the distance, but Hitchins knocked Bauza down twice. It was entertaining. That was good TV. I want to see Hitchins make some good TV because at the end of the day, yes, it's about winning. It's about winning world titles. But you make your money by being good on TV, by being someone that fans want to watch on TV. If a television show is not popular, it gets canceled. It gets taken off TV. By that same thinking, if a fighter is not aesthetically pleasing, if fans don't want to see a fighter fight, why are you putting him on TV? Like that's kind of what it boils down to for me. So again, it doesn't have to be this knockdown slugfest. I don't think he needs to change his game entirely, but if there are opportunities, and I think Lemos is going to give him some, but if there are opportunities to finish a guy off, don't pull your punches. Don't step back and move. Go in, go for a finish. See if you can, create a mandate to get that world title fight next.
Yeah, and I would say that the good thing is that even if he doesn't do it here and he does get the Subriel Matias fight, he'll have no choice but to do it against Subriel Matias. So whether we see it out of him this time or next time, like Matias is going to absolutely insist that happens. So we're going to see it out of him one way or another. And you're right, Chris. Like we've seen examples of fighters that weren't like totally frozen out, but we pay attention to them less, or networks have paid attention to them less. I mean, the example that everyone always think of is Guillermo Rigondeaux, where he just sort of started like moving down the card a little bit. And yes, we know this guy's excellent. The absolute purists who love that kind of stuff, they're going to tune in for it. But
there are not many of them. They are few and far between.
Right. And Hitchins has the kind of style that could land him in that same boat, I think, where he could 120, 108, a lot of people doing it that way. I mean, another way that he can go, if he's not fully comfortable being a little bit more aggressive, is he could be even more playful in the ring and be the guy who's entertaining to watch because, he's mocking you as he's outboxing you. So there could be a little bit of that, or he could just keep accepting phone calls in between rounds. And that also creates some excitement.
I just need to see a little bit of action from him. Like, he's capable of hurting opponents. Like, he's strong. His jab is really sharp. And I saw against Zepeda a wounded opponent in front of him. He's got to take advantage of those opportunities. I mean, you mentioned Guillermo Rigondeaux. Like, an active version of him right now is Sandor Martin. Like, Sandor Martin is out there, and he's in position to fight for Devin Haney's world title. I think Devin Haney's actually paying him a little bit of money not to enforce that mandatory position before the Ryan Garcia fight. Like, I don't think Devin Haney's ever going to fight Sandor Martin. So and maybe Matias doesn't fight him, right? Like, if Devin's now making some noise if he beats Ryan Garcia of fighting Subriel Matias in his next fight. Now, Matias is going to fight, I think, at some point. He is fighting in June, Liam Paro in his home country. After that, he can make a fight with Devin Haney as a unification fight. The IBF's not going to stand in the way of that. So, if you're Hitchins, you've got to make a statement. You've got to do something that makes people notice. Don't just win 120, 108. We all know you're capable of that. Do a little bit more to bring some action to this fight.
Yeah, I'm just overly protective of Richardson Hitchins because I'm a sicko and I love trash talking, arrogant, skittish boxers. So that's a fetish of mine. So I'm going to protect him.
When you talked about the purists that showed up early to watch Rigondeaux, you were talking about yourself, right?
Yes, I was. Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
you were.
Yeah. Catch him on BKFC coming up later this year.
Wow. And there's that promo. Corey, good stuff, man. Always appreciate your time. Know it's been a busy week. Thanks for joining me, buddy.
Anytime, man.